Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm very lucky to have two of Netflix Asia's chiefs with me today. Gaurav Pradhan, who's Netflix Asia's Director of Business Development, and Nigel Baptiste, who's Director of Partner Engagement. Just a very quick show of hands before we start. Who here has or has access to a Netflix subscription? Just stick your hands up. Yeah, me too. Put your hand up again if you've used it in the last 48 hours. Your Netflix? Yeah, pretty good representation. So I think we don't need to tell you what Netflix is. I'm very proud to say that, the hundreds, thousands of hours of Netflix content there is out there. The last thing I watched on Netflix was the 1999 film Notting Hill. So with that, get us started, gents, and tell us what Netflix is doing in Asia.
So for us to talk about where we are today, it's worthwhile spending just a minute to talk about where we've come from. So many of you may or may not be aware that Netflix started about 20 years ago in Silicon Valley as a DVD by mail company. It was only about 10 years after that we actually started streaming. And just think about the context now, but back then when we started streaming, it was just in the US, and it was just on PCs that were physically connected to the internet. About a year after that, we started our first device integration. So Roku was one of the first devices that we integrated on and started this journey of kind of device ubiquity, which we'll talk a little bit later on. Around the same time, we then also started moving internationally. So the big leap from being centered in the US to making that big jump to Canada, which I know is kind of laughable in today's context, but for us, we needed to learn about what Canadian consumers wanted to watch, partnerships there, marketing, what it would be like for us to extend the service outside of the US. And throughout the next, I would say 5 years, which is around the time I joined, we did like a pretty steady, progressive, slow rollout into different parts of the world, into the UK, into Latin America and the Caribbean, where I'm from. We first entered Asia in 2015 by launching the service in Japan and around the same time in Australia. And then about 3 months later, we took a huge leap and launched 130 countries all at once, so including all of the markets in Asia outside of China. And from an engineering perspective, that was really difficult to do, but from a consumer perspective or a country perspective, that's the easy part. Now the journey that we're on is trying to figure out how to be successful, how to attract customers and get the right content in each one of those markets. Singapore is the headquarters for our Asian section. Gaurav was here in 2016 when we first launched. So what was it like being in the Netflix office back in 2016?
Hi, thanks, Nigel. So 2016 is when I joined Netflix and started off working for Netflix. It felt like a startup at that point in time. I joined a team that was less than 40 people. And at that time, the focus was to recruit locally, grow our content teams, grow our marketing teams, and our partnerships team. Fast forward to 2017 is when we actually got into producing original content from the region. We realized that content is really local, and regional content travels the world and regionally really well. That's where the focus on content production in the region started off. Fast forward to 2019, we have now over 100 originals new and returning to the service. And these originals emanate from 8 different countries, to name a few: Japan, India, Thailand, Korea. And today we are available in 20 plus languages in subtitling and dubbing across the world. Recently, in 2017, we localized our service in Thailand, in Thai. So we are available in the local language, and that gave us a big blip in the curve in Thailand. And more recently, in Q3 of 2018, we localized our service in Indonesia Bahasa, where we're also seeing rapid growth. That's where we're at.
So obviously you're happy to see any audience numbers go up, but in Asia Pacific, are you keen to push in any particular countries?
So as I said earlier, the focus for us is to be successful in every one of these markets. So fast forward to 2019, we're now in 190 countries with about 149 million members globally. The focus in Asia, you can talk about kind of where our fans are and how that is progressing and growing.
Sure, 149 million paid members globally. 60%, and this is a significant number, 60% of these members are from outside of the United States of America. A large percentage, rapidly growing percentage of this are represented from the region here in India and Southeast Asia. We have fans in India, Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, Japan, and Korea, and we are rapidly growing in markets like Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and we continue to focus on our partnerships, which is a cornerstone of our strategy, because partners like telcos, ISPs, TV manufacturers, and we'll speak more about that later on, know these markets really well, understand these markets really well. We bring this content directly to the consumer and also to our partners to take it to their subscriber bases. So there's a huge focus on partnerships, and we're rapidly expanding across the region.
Let's talk about content. What have you found works well in Asia Pacific, and have there been any surprises?
So, I mean, it's no surprise for us that we consider ourselves really young in this market. Like, there's a lot for us to learn. We haven't cracked it yet. We have a big office here and an expanding across the region as well, but we still think about ourselves as in learning mode. So when we launched in Asia and as we continued to develop from 2017 on, we were looking for the things that would surprise us. Like, what are we going to learn about our members in Asia that is different than our members in Germany or in the UK or in the US? And unsurprisingly, what we found out is that it's not so much about what people in different countries watch. It is the fact that content crosses boundaries. So it doesn't matter where the content was created from. Great content just tells a great story, and people view that everywhere around the world. That's one of the bigger learnings for us. There's some other things that we'll talk about later on in terms of mobile and what that meant for devices, but we were expecting big surprises here, and we actually haven't found them.
So in terms of audience figures, what's popular? Is it comedy? Is it documentaries? Is it the full range?
It's everything. It's the full range of content. And we don't think about creating genres for a specific market. We think about just creating great titles and a vast array of titles. Everything outside of kids' content is made for a global audience, and that's how we think about it. When we first start talking to consumers in this part of the world, members in this part of the world, the obvious things that come up is local content is very important. Regional content is very important. That's a no-brainer. We're investing heavily there, but also we see those members watching. Oh, sorry. We see those.
I think we were losing your microphone there, so let's try this other one.
I've broken it already. All right, sorry. The engineer in the room has broken the microphone. Yeah, so we see our viewing of content across all of the genres that we have, with the exception of kids content, which is targeted just for a younger audience.
And I'd like to add to that by saying I think content is a very, very personal choice. It's something for everybody. Our product, our service is designed in a way to tailor to the viewing habits and tastes of individual members. Take, for example, I feel these examples are relevant. Take, for example, Sacred Games, the Indian original from India in Hindi. 2 out of 3 people who viewed Sacred Games was from outside of India. Take The Night Comes for Us. That was our first original movie out of Indonesia, released in Q3 of 2018. It did exceptionally well in Indonesia, no brainer. It did really well in Southeast Asia, we expected that. But it did really well in Latin America and in Africa. So content is a very personal choice. Our service enables discovery of content for people who may not have thought about looking at Indonesian content or Indian content, which is dubbed in their language. I love Narcos. Most of the service is not in English or in Hindi, and I don't speak the language. But I love Narcos and La Casa de Papel, which was in Spanish.
So Narcos is a great example. I'm glad you brought it up, because that was a big bet for us in producing something that was all in Spanish and primarily targeting a Latin American or US audience. But that show has just been incredible. I mean, Gaurav and our team spend a lot of time in the region. So we're in Thailand and in India. And when we talk to people just on the street, just every day, those are the things that they talk about, how great Narcos is or how great Sacred Games is. And that's how we know we're really kind of capturing the zeitgeist in those markets, is when content that is produced, we think about it as being produced for a specific region, is just global. It's just everywhere. And that's fantastic.
In terms of how the content is viewed, in the US and Western Europe, people are watching on big screens, but in Asia, there's a huge push towards mobile, and for many people, mobile is how they consume either most of or all of their content. How do you have to change your approach to things for a mobile-first audience?
I'll take that. So you're absolutely right, Rich. Mobile is important to us, but that importance gets a little more pronounced in this part of the world. Let me correct that. Not a little more, gets very pronounced in this part of the world. Because look, internet for the first time was experienced in this part of the world on the mobile device. That, for the vast majority, is the only connected screen that people have. So we do see a huge number of people signing up on the mobile device and also consuming Netflix on the mobile device. What we have done is we've partnered very closely with telco providers who know their subscriber bases and run data plans and various packs in the market. We've a simple partnership that we do, which works really well in this part of the world in comparison to the rest of the world, is video data plans. And that makes browsing of video, not just for Netflix, but just of video in general, cheaper. So you buy a data plan which has Netflix included in it, and it makes browsing and consuming Netflix on your mobile device much cheaper from a data perspective. Also, globally, we launched this feature called Downloads, where you can offline Netflix content on your mobile device or on your tablet. And that, which was not a surprise for us, has done really well in India and Southeast Asia. Mobile networks tend to be patchy, and people prefer to actually offline the content and view it in an offline mode or when they have no data connectivity. It's a feature that I use a lot when I'm traveling, and I travel a lot, where I'm able to catch up on Netflix series on an aircraft where I have no data connectivity, and I'm just able to seamlessly browse and watch it.
So, Rich, before we move on, I want to just add a couple points to that. So, the way Netflix employees think about ourselves in the company is that we're constantly in learning mode. So, we hire very talented people from the region that know the markets really well, but we approach everything with this sense of humility that there's a lot that we need to uncover. So we test our way through a lot of right solutions. So when we sit in our internal meetings, it's not the most senior person in the room or the smartest person in the room that makes decisions. Data helps guide what we do. And if we were having this conversation about 3 years ago and the topic around downloads would have come up, our stance was remarkably very different. We just thought downloads is a temporary gap in the market. It's not really going to be critical for us. Internet penetration will catch up everywhere in the world, and therefore, let's not spend our resources developing something that's just a patch. Our experience and our learning in Asia is that we were completely wrong. That is not the case. So then making the investment to do downloads specifically for Asia it was the right one, but we've learned that it's relevant globally everywhere. I also want to just challenge one of the premise of your question, which is that smart TVs are less relevant, or what we call 10-foot devices are less relevant here. Everything Gaurav said about mobile is absolutely correct, but there's a couple things that we also learned. So when we first launched in Asia, and we continue to see this, most people discover our service and start viewing on a mobile device. There's no question about that. One of the things we wanted to see was how that behavior would be different when we were launched and when we continue to grow. And surprisingly for us, what we see is that over 3 months and 6 months, these are paid members now who stay on the service 3 months and 6 months, viewing migrates over to a 10-foot device. Now, the data doesn't tell us why that is. I have an opinion about it. I think our content is best viewed on a large screen. It's longer content. It's not YouTube or user-generated content. The ubiquity of smart TVs and the price of smart TVs have come down. So there's lots of things that contribute to that. Family viewing is big in this part of the world as well, and that's best suited for a device, for a large screen device. But ultimately, for us, we don't pick winners and losers in the device game. What we want to do is make sure that Netflix is available everywhere that you have a device that is connected to the internet that has a screen. And then empower our members to decide where they want to watch that content and when they want to watch it. So we don't see them picking and choosing. We see people watching on a mobile. While they're cooking dinner, they're watching on a tablet, and then they transition over to a smart TV. That is true everywhere in the world, and it's also true here as well.
So how do you do that? How do you make sure Netflix is available wherever the audience want it?
It's the DNA of our team. Essentially, the partnerships group is focused on these long-term strategic partnerships across the ecosystem. So when we talk about partnerships in Gaurav's and I context, we're talking about device manufacturers, cable TV, set-top box providers, even down to the system chip manufacturers. We get that ingrained in them. The goal for us is to make sure that it's not just the content that gets delivered, but it's the quality of that content that gets delivered. So everything in the ecosystem. So working with, if we just the smart TV section, working with the Samsungs and LGs of the world and the Sonys of the world over the past 8 or 10 years to make the experience of viewing OTT content on their devices better. We have a shared goal. We want to delight customers. They want to make their customers who buy their devices happy, and we want to make our members who sign up for Netflix and watch on those devices happy. So there's a natural partnership. Partnerships for us spanned 15 years, 20 years. We spend a lot of our time working with these partners about innovation, like looking 5 years ahead, where they're going, where are we going, and making sure those plans align. The thing that keeps us, Netflix, centered is the consumer experience. So there's lots of things that we would love to do from an innovation standpoint, but what keeps us grounded is what does that actually mean for consumers? Are they going to benefit from that? Is their experience watching Netflix or services like Netflix going to be better off if we make this investment? And if the answer is yes, then it's something that we test and learn and introduce into the service.
So you talk about 5 years ahead. Is there anything that you can tell us that you're working with partners at the moment on in that kind of 5 years ahead?
No.
Fair enough. Going back to the mobile kind of prevalence, have you any evidence to suggest that changes the content people watch? I mean, I watch big high-def things on my big screen at home. Do people miss out watching that on a mobile, or do they still choose to watch these kind of epic shows?
So I'd answer that question in the way that mobile is where you start off. To Nigel's point, in 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, you will navigate or find a way to navigate onto a 10-foot experience, a television experience. If you look at the spectrum of partnerships we do, the focus definitely is mobile, but then you've partnered with a pay TV operator. That box connects into a 10-foot experience where you have a Netflix button on the remote and a subscriber says, hey, I'd actually want to view this content on a 10-foot experience. So people will find ways, as broadband connectivity to the home, as Wi-Fi connectivity to the home grows, people will find ways, because that's the best way to consume our format of content, long-form content, will find ways to navigate onto a 10-foot experience. People will also, as content continues to be more and more engaging, people will also not want to detach from that content, and there'll be many instances where you cannot view that content on a 10-foot experience. Traveling on an aircraft, heading to work, heading somewhere else, you will transfer onto a laptop or a tablet or a mobile device. That's how we think of it. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Tell us a bit more about how you work with the telecoms companies to keep the audience kind of subscribed to Netflix.
Yeah. So we've covered this a couple of times. Mobile is really important for us. People may, sign into other devices, but that's essentially where the vast majority of people sign up. How we engage audiences is to ensure that. So, take Nigel's example. He was wanting to speak. His mic was not working. That's a moment of truth. When a consumer has expressed that he wants to or she wants to watch a piece of content, we need to make sure, or our team needs to make sure, that content actually plays out on the screen or the device that they wanted to play that on. So there's something called adaptive bitrate streaming, where the quality of the video will keep adjusting on the fly depending on the bandwidth available. And majority of the bandwidth that is available in this part of the world is telco. So that is something that we've built internally in Netflix for our app and the content that's available there. Downloads is there. I've talked about video data plans. We also work very closely with telcos on payments. That's a big friction point. Credit card penetration, we all know, is very low in this part of the world. But what has also come to our knowledge is that people who have credit cards and debit cards, and debit card penetration is pretty significant, who have cards are not necessarily willing to use those cards online for online services. So we partner with telcos, ISPs, pay TV operators on the payment side as well, where you can sign up for Netflix and opt for your telco or your pay TV provider or ISP and say that I'll pay for Netflix through my monthly billing through those. So direct carrier billing for Netflix was born in this part of the world, not in the US, not in Europe, where when you start your sign-up journey on the Netflix flow. When you come to the payments page, you see your carrier there, you click it, and your Netflix bill gets added onto your monthly bill. So that's how we try and keep, from a product perspective, try and keep the subscriber engaged. Content is where it starts, but we try and remove the friction for the end user.
The other thing I'd say is that we don't segment by demographics. So age and gender is not something that we think about creating content for, and that's where the partnerships become important. So with either it's telco operators or it's cable service providers in each country, they know their markets really well and they know how to market to those. So we have teams that are focused on partner marketing that work closely with them to try to figure out which is the content that in their market, in whether it's Thailand, that they think would resonate best with that segment for their consumers, and we partner with that, giving them access to that content. You see a lot. We were just in Thailand a couple of days ago, and you see a lot of Stranger Things billboards all over the place. That show is a monster in Thailand. It's really, really fantastic, and our partners there latch on to that, saying,
I think the word is Demogorgon.
Yes, there you go. It's a Demogorgon. That's right. Yeah. So that's another area where partnerships are fundamentally important to us. Because they know their markets and they know their consumers much better than we do, and we look to get shared members out of that.
Who are your competitors in Asia Pacific?
So we don't think about competitors in the way that most companies do. We think about winning these moments of truth. So what we want to do is two things. One, we want people to find content that they can only watch on Netflix. But we know that the ecosystem around us will exist. So the Disney Pluses and the YouTubes and everybody else making great content, and they do their thing really, really well, and consumers benefit from that. What we want to do is focus on what we do really, really well and bring different content. It is a phenomenal time to be all of you in the audience, to be consumers right now, because you have everyone, Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, everybody bidding for great content and producing lots of original content and getting that out to you at a very, very low cost. So we don't spend a lot of time thinking about competition in that way. We think about how the ecosystem of OTT grows, and that what we can do best to serve the members that we have.
You touched earlier on local and regional content. How have you worked with local providers and local producers, and how has that served the audience both in Asia Pacific and elsewhere?
So one of the fastest growing teams that we have within not just the office in Singapore, but across the region as well, is our content team. So being local and working with content producers, content directors, everything from kind of script to screen is a huge priority for us. Content producers and directors love working with Netflix because we give them the freedom to kind of tell their creative story. One of the ways to think about it, it's not just that it's creating content. If you're a Thai producer or a Malaysian producer making content that's relevant in your market, you now have access to a global audience that's almost 150 members, where getting that reach with one partnership is super critical. So the teams that are growing in India and in Singapore and in Korea are just focused on finding those local content producers and the talent and getting content that will please all of our members.
How well does some of the stuff produced here in Asia Pacific travel?
Really well. So one of our core beliefs, to add to what Nigel was saying, is a great story can come from anywhere. Sacred Games, as I said, 2 out of 3 viewers were from outside of India, a show that was in Hindi. Again, coming back to the example of The Night Comes for Us, an Indonesian original movie, traveled really well across the world, did exceptionally well in Latin America and in Africa. The teams are growing. The fastest growing team in the region is the content team, to weed out and find out those local stories that can be put onto our service and travel across the world. It's also a platform where you get to tell local stories locally, and as to Nigel's point, there's a lot of creative freedom that our creators get to tell the story in the manner and fashion they want to tell it. But also for local audiences for the first time to experience global content that they would not have had access to. So I named a few. Narcos was one of them. The Crown was one of them. La Casa de Papel from Spain was one of them. So it's a good mix of global content coming locally and local content traveling globally.
So to make it a little more personal, so I briefly mentioned at the beginning, so I grew up on literally a tiny island in the Caribbean. There's 100,000 of us in the world. and now I live and work in Singapore. My wife is from Pakistan, and she has she's like 15 uncles, and I mean just massive family over there. One of the things that connects us together, obviously love that that we're a family, but is content. So the piece of content that launches over Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat with my friends who are thousands of miles away on a Saturday morning, that's what we're talking about. And when that content is launched in Singapore, it's also launched in Grenada, it's also launched in Lahore, and we're all talking about that. It's one of the ways that I think Netflix kind of brings everyone together over that content. And it's one of the intangible metrics that we look at for when we are being successful in a market. So it's not, I would love to say that all of the stuff that I do and my team does about enabling Netflix on devices and making that, that experience seamless and frictionless, that is the stuff that's just supposed to happen. You as our members are never supposed to think about that. When we know that we've hit that sweet spot, or starting to, is when you're out at a cafe with your friends or dinner with your family and you're talking about a piece of content. That's the story that we want you to tell. That's our goal.
So just to wrap us up, what's next for Netflix Asia?
So there are three ways that we think about what's next. So when we look at the strategy that we have for the rest of the year and going into 2020, it's kind of broken down into three main areas. So one of it is, I forget who said this, but the main thing is to remember to keep the main thing, and the main thing for us is content. So continuing to develop great content and great stories, and more of that will come from this part of the world. So investing heavily with local, international, with local content, regional content that comes from this region that gets exported out. That's going to be pretty critical. But then also trying to find ways to tell stories in a different way. So if anyone in here is a fan of Black Mirror, the interactive storytelling that we tried with Bandersnatch was a bit of a test. Again, we're learning, is there a different way to tell content? And that turned out to be really successful. So we're going to continue to push the boundaries there. The other piece of it which is the world that Gaurav and I live in, which is around partnerships. So just continuing to go deeper with the partners that we have. What are the ways that they're innovating and they're learning to be successful in their markets that we can contribute to, and vice versa. And then on the product side, closer to me, it's about removing friction from the process. So there's a lot of it that's already gone. Today's smart TVs are almost like your smartphone. But they're not completely there yet. We're continuing on that journey to make sure that with things like Netflix buttons or TV Fast Resume, that we just push those boundaries further so that when you choose to watch Netflix or even services like Netflix, that experience is just seamless and frictionless. There's still a lot of work for us to do. So those are the three main areas that we're focused on.
Final question I have to ask, when is the next series of Stranger Things coming out?
Soon.
Thank you very much. Gaurav, Pradhan and Nigel Baptiste from Netflix.
Thanks
Thank
so much,
you very
Rich.
much.
Thanks, everyone.